is to record the meetings, flip on the record switch, which I almost forgot to do. So when we start our classes next time, in our next class, just remind me to turn the record button on. All
Okay.
right, that's very good. Let's see. A couple of other administrative things I want to go through. Oh, yes. The somebody's coming in now. Okay, the class schedule. The class schedule. Just want to remind everybody that of course we have the class now and we have a class next week. There is no class on the 22nd. Okay, no class. That's your Thanksgiving break. And then we resume classes after that on the 29th. Then we go into December, the 6th and the 13th. So no class on the week of Thanksgiving. I've had some confusion there in the past. Okay, let's see. Yes, and I guess I'll send an email out on this. If you do miss a session, uh, you're responsible for listening to the recording, and I will. There is a code, 3-digit code that I will include in the recording. So if you do miss the code, email me. If you do miss the live session, make sure you email me the code so I can give you credit for participation, and I'll send an email out on that. Let's see. We'll do that at the end. Anybody have any questions of me for me? Nothing. Okay. So what? If there are no questions, we'll go ahead and go into the slides. What I somebody did somebody else just sign in? No. Okay. Anyhow, yeah. So we'll go into the slides, and what I like to do is is if we go along, feel free to ask me any questions, or if you want to add something to it based on on your readings, your research, or on your world of work, please jump right in. I don't like to do all the talking, and you all have a lot of good experience behind you, so I'm sure there's a lot of input that you can provide from your own experiences. So feel free to jump in. Also, if I'm going a little bit too fast, or if there's something that you need me to go back over, please stop me. Okay, I don't want to. I don't want to rush through these things and then you have problems or questions at the end. If I don't get through, I probably will. But if I don't get through all the slides tonight, it's not a big deal. We'll pick it up next time. But I want to make sure that you understand the material. So if you have to stop me and ask questions or clarifications, feel free to do so. The worst kind of questions is the one that doesn't get asked. Okay. So in fact, give me 1 minute and I'll be right back. Hang on. Anybody anybody have any questions on the syllabus? No. Oh, okay. And I see Danielle just arrived. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Danielle James? Hear me, Danielle? All right. Okay, so let me go ahead and. Okay, so this is lesson one, innovation and change, and also the Cotter's eight-step change process, which I'll discuss in a minute. So really, in this course, you're going to be looking at your projects and looking to learn about how to lean out your processes, your projects, to make them more efficient and more effective. And you'll learn, we'll be covering several tools that'll enable you to do that, particularly value stream mapping. It's also one of the outcomes of the program, of the NGS program, is also to really make every one of you, and I'm sure most of you already are, but to be change agents in your organizations. And so a lot of these tools that you're going to be learning, the mapping and some of the others, will enable you to be change agents, because that certainly is, without question, one of the outcomes of the program. I mean, really, if you think about this whole business of process improvement and the whole course, it's really about organizational change and really even attempting to change the culture of an organization. So what you need to do for this course is kind of put on what I call your lean glasses and really take a critical look at your processes, your project, to see how you could lean it out and make it more efficient and more effective. So really, essentially, this course is more about the lean side of Lean Six Sigma. Okay, Six Sigma being more in the area of variation, and Lean being able to eliminate as much non-value added activity as possible. So anyway, talk about Kotter's eight-step change process. Kotter was I think he still is, a professor at Harvard University, and his eight-step change process is a model for organizational change. So they don't really go into it. I actually included this slide. It's not in the actual slides. In fact, I actually went through the program. I earned my master's degree through NGS back in 2005, and his book was required reading at the time. But this is basically his eight-step change model. And the first thing before you're going to initiate any type of change in an organization is, and maybe even outside your organization, this could also apply to an organization you might volunteer for, or any type of organization, maybe even in your own personal life, is there has to be a sense of urgency for change. Okay, so there has to be something. We used to call it in my organization a burning platform, something that's forcing you to make a change. Maybe there's maybe new competition is on the horizon. Maybe there's going to be maybe if in terms of a government agency, maybe there's going to be a change in funding. So there's got to be something that's going to initiate change. In my organization, we were basically an accounting shop, and our sense of urgency for the one burning platform that we had, I should say, is we converted to a new accounting system and we failed the audit. Okay, pretty serious stuff. So that certainly created a sense of urgency for change. And if you think of your own organizations, I'm sure most of you have been in situations where there has all of a sudden something come down the pike, so to speak, and has created some sort of a change. So it's really hard to initiate change without a sense of urgency. And then you have to obtain a guiding coalition to get the support of key people in your organization to start building the foundation for change. And you have to create a vision for change, and that has to be communicated throughout the organization. Where do we want to be? I mean, what is the vision for change? Because change, I think we can all agree, change is hard on people. The old saying is, people say, "I love change as long as it doesn't affect me." But if you create a vision for it, and you're communicating the vision to the organization, there's a better chance of acceptance. Also, removing the obstacles to change, which can be challenging, certainly, but with a good guiding coalition, it might be feasible. You want to create short-term wins, okay? Because sometimes you have to win the battles before winning the war, so to speak. So you want to have some short-term wins. They may be very minor, but when you have them, they need to be communicated throughout the organization. I go back to my organization with the audit. We said we didn't pass the audit, and we really didn't even pass the audit the second time around. But we were able to we did show some improvement, and we communicated that throughout the organization. So. You want to be able to consolidate these improvements and then make sure that these changes become really part of the culture of the organization. I mean, another example of change was instituting Lean Six Sigma in our organization. And that was, and probably the most difficult part of it was anchoring the change, really getting and just changing the organization culture. So that's basically Kotter's eight-step change model, and like I said, I think it's a good model, and I think it applies in a lot of different situations. Anybody familiar with Kotter and his change model, or anybody have any other models that they're familiar with? All right. So anyway, that basically is Kotter's eight-step change process. So what is lean? Because really, this is what we're going to spend most of the time in this course really about leaning. So basically, it's a systematic approach to identify eliminate waste. So we're looking to eliminate non-value added activities, and we do this through continuous improvement by flowing the product at the pull of the customer in pursuit of perfection. And we'll learn about some of the concepts like pull and batch processing and those things. But start thinking about your own process, in your own world of work, and what kind of activities are non-value added. In other words, those are activities that are occurring in a given process that the customer really shouldn't be paying for. And we'll go through we'll go through some of the different wastes that are probable that really that a good lean system should try to minimize or eliminate. So this is a comparison of continual improvement approaches. The Six Sigma, we eliminate variations in results for customers. So I know we've got team variation. So you're probably your project may be more on the Six Sigma side. Is that correct? Team variation.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and basically you use a lot of statistics to measure the variation in a process, and also eliminate defects also. And then the lean is basically focusing on delivery of value to the customer at all times. In other words, and we talk about value, we're talking about value-added activities that we're delivering to the customer. Those activities that the customer is willing to pay for. And then Kaizen is a continuous improvement effort that was pioneered by Toyota, and you'll be In your readings, you'll be learning about it in Leiker's book on the Toyota way. And then the theory of constraints, discovering and eliminate bottlenecks to throughput and results. The other thing so basically they all these process improvement activities are customer focused, and you're looking to eliminate waste and variation in the system. This course also is probably a little more, in the NGS we try to balance theory and practice. This course probably is geared a little more towards the theory side, so especially with the theory of constraints. So, and there's also a fair amount of quite a bit of reading in this course. So if you haven't already done so, please make sure you have your textbooks and just start reading so you don't get behind. All right. So we talk about, been talking about value for the last few minutes. So, what is it? This is a good definition. Uh, Basically, it's a capability provided to a customer at the right time at an appropriate price. Okay, as defined by the customer. As we know, the customer should define quality, but at the same time the price has to be competitive. So it's basically having at the right time, at the right place, at the right price. Okay, so we're looking at service, availability, cost, performance, and value. And then waste it's any activity that consumes resources but creates no value. So that's what we're looking for. You want to look at your process, look at your project, and look at trying to eliminate as much waste and or as we call it, non-value added activity in your process as possible. So, what is lean? And we talk about Lean Six Sigma, and really they're two separate disciplines. There's actually an organization that's specific to Lean, and there's one that's specific to Six Sigma, I Six Sigma, and then Womack's book on what's his name? Hang on. Yeah, one of your textbooks is Lean Thinking by James Womack, and he's really the father of Lean. So there's basically a Lean organization, a Six Sigma organization. There was a consulting group called the George Group, and they basically combined Lean with Six Sigma, so it became known as Lean Six Sigma. But they are two separate disciplines, and there are folks that are basically just into Lean and really don't want to have much to do with Six Sigma, and vice versa. But in fact, this George Group, they're now, I think, part of the Accenture Group. They're the one organization we use to implement Lean Six Sigma in our organization. But there was that organization that pretty much combined Lean with Lean Six Sigma. So basically, looking at we're focused on eliminating waste in a process, and we'll look at the 8 wastes shortly. And the second bullet, it's kind of I wouldn't call it controversial. Lean production is not about eliminating people, and I think in many organizations, you start talking about some of these process improvement initiatives. I think some people start automatically thinking, hey, is my job going to go away if they really lean out this process? And that's one of the obstacles I would suggest to implementing change in an organization, especially with implementing something like Lean Six Sigma. Getting back to my own organization, a pledge was made to all the employees that nobody would lose any jobs or would receive a downgrade. So people were moved around, but nobody lost any jobs, and nobody got a reduction in pay grade. So, but in the real world, it certainly could happen. But if you're going to initiate a lean in an organization and expect to get organizational support, threatening to eliminate people, it certainly isn't the way to go about doing it. It's also about expanding capacity by reducing costs and shortening cycle times between the order and ship dates. So basically taking maybe the same amount of taking your maybe your factory floor or your asset and not necessarily expanding the size of the factory, but getting more out of that particular asset, more out of that particular machine, and more out of your most important resource, which are your the people. And then it's also understanding what is important to the customer. You've already done in your password the voice of the customer. So this is certainly Lean is all about what is important to the customer. And at this point in your projects, you should have a pretty good idea of what's important to the customer. So in those of you where who are in organizations where you have some sort of a process improvement program, whether it's Lean or Six Sigma, how did it, when those of you who were involved in the implementation, how were you able to, did people feel threatened? Was that an issue? And how did you overcome it? Anybody have any background with that? Nobody? Oh, you're a quiet group tonight.
Sir?
Yeah.
I just have a question, not necessarily an answer to your question, but a question in regards to how we're looking at our specific problem set in our MVP. The third bullet said lean production is about expanding capacity by reducing costs and shortening cycle times between order and ship date.
Mm-hmm.
So our problem set, when we're looking at mainly cutting down on the time that it takes for us to repair our aircrafts, getting the parts on time and repair the aircrafts, and in order to make them fully mission capable. Can a solution, can lean production be about shortening cycle times only and not both reducing costs and shortening cycle times? Can it be one versus the two, cost and time?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah, you may not be able to reduce costs, but certainly reducing cycle time it can be done independently of reducing costs. Obviously, the ideal situation would be to do both, but really depending on the type of organization and the mission of your organization, possibly in a military organization, I mean, costs are certainly important, but to accomplish the mission and enhance mission capability, certainly reducing cycle times would definitely be an objective. No question about it. I mean, people. I don't think you're ever going to hear complaints from a customer that they can get a service or product faster and on time. So yes, that's the short answer.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yep. And then, as I said, lean is important to what is important to the customer. So, there are certainly benefits to implementing lean. So the second, it should provide tangible benefits. Okay, They should be not only tangible benefits, but they should be tangible and measurable benefits. Okay, so reduces costs, not just selling price. So what does that mean? It means you may be able to, by making your process more efficient, by reducing delivery time, cycle time, and some of the other factors, and maybe eliminating non-value added activity, you may be able to keep your selling price at whatever the current level is, but by reducing your cost, your you could be increasing the profit margin for your organization, or even if you're not if you're a nonprofit organization, then you can certainly use your savings in and apply those savings to other areas in your organization, or use the money for other purposes. And in some cases, by reducing costs, especially if you're in a competitive environment, you could reduce your selling price and still maintain or even improve your profit margin. Good example of that, back in the day, Walmart actually was able to reduce their selling prices on a lot of products, especially when they first ramped up, because they had a very efficient distribution system. They actually, I remember back in the 1980s, actually did a paper on Walmart before they became as big as they are now. And even though their gross profit was down, well, they were able to reduce their selling price and increase their profits because they were able to reduce costs, especially in the area of logistics. So yes, so you can certainly reduce costs and even lower your selling price at the same time and still make more money. So it also improves quality, hopefully improve customer ratings and perceptions, so that you can hold on to your customer base and hopefully expand it, increasing customer satisfaction. And a good lean system is, and this is important, a good lean system should involve employees. It should not necessarily be a top-down. Employees should be actively involved in looking at their processes and really being involved in change. I would suggest if the employees aren't involved in it, then don't even bother implementing a lean program for your organization, because it's really to get employee involvement, they have to have a say. They're the ones that are usually the most knowledgeable about a particular process in their world of work, and to get them engaged and motivated, they need to be improved. It has to be a what's in it for me type of a situation. And lastly, helps transform organization. As I said before, we're in the business of organizational change. One of the benefits of going through this program is that you will be your change agents for your respective organizations. You'll have the tools to implement changes, not only in the process, but even in the organizational culture. So probably one of the real success stories, and really one of the founders of Lean, is Toyota. And of course, you'll be reading about the Toyota production system. And very successful organization. They're constantly looking at eliminating waste to shorten their production flow. They've really were the pioneers in just-in-time inventory, having the right part at the right time, at the right place, the right amount, and also at the right price, using a continuous flow system, using pull system based on customer demand instead of a batch system, which tends to create bottlenecks and creates a lot of inventory lying around, and also a level production system. They've also built in quality, which includes error proofing, Poka-yoke, and we'll discuss that as later on in the course. effective visual controls, and they've been successful by standardizing work, good products and processes, supplier involvement, and so on. I'd have to say, from a personal standpoint, the best vehicles I've ever owned are Toyotas. My younger son is driving a 1998 Toyota Camry with about 240,000 miles on it, and it's still running. Um, they're an excellent they make an excellent product, and in fact, I was just reading today in the Wall Street Journal where they're expecting a higher improve their profits this year. Although they're not perfect either. They had some problems with some of their quality systems a couple of years ago, and they also misread the SUV and truck market. They actually right now there's actually a shortage of the RAV4 and the Toyota and the Highlander, which are two of the hottest selling SUVs on the market. And they kind of overproduced on their sedans like the Camry. So apparently they're offering incentives to move the Camrys, and they're trying to ramp up production to meet demands for the RAV4 and the Highlander. So even a company as successful as them can mess up sometimes, but they do have a excellent reputation, and they have I know they have at least one production facility in the United States. I believe they make one of their pickup trucks in San Antonio, Texas. So they do provide jobs here in this country. Questions, comments, anybody? And this is kind of a model of their production system, and really the cornerstone of it is Kaizen, is a continuous improvement. In fact, their employees are responsible for recommending process improvement. It's part of their evaluation, and I'm not talking about just management. I'm talking about even their production employees. So Kaizen is really their byword, and they've implemented just in time with their inventories, with their pull systems. They have quick changeover and a very effective logistics system. Some of the tools they use are the Gemba system. That's really basically they will in the Gemba. What they call it, the Gemba walk. They'll have an engineer stand near the production line and just watch and observe their whole production system. So that's one of their hallmarks. They use the 5 whys. They keep their eyes open for waste, and they're constantly using advanced techniques for problem solving. And Jacoda, it's making problems visible. In fact, on their production line, any production employee can stop their production if they see something that's amiss in their production system. They can actually stop it, and then at that point, they investigate what the problem is, try to get to the root cause, and solve it as soon as possible. So that they're not waiting for the product to leave the factory, and then having an unsatisfied customer. So that's basically that's kind of their house of quality, and really the model of their production system. So there's a little bit of a background on Lean. So it goes back starting Henry Ford, father of mass production, really developed the first continuous flow line to produce the Model T. And in the 30s, the president of GM, he created different departments which allowed for more product variety. Yeah, the different makes, Chevrolet, Cadillac, and so on. And then James Womack, who I mentioned before, he mentioned the machine that changed the world based on an MIT study, and basically in that book they coined the phrase lean manufacturing, and then you're going to be one of the books you'll be reading is Lean Thinking, and that's written by James Womack. And then right after the World War II, up until the mid '70s, Taiichi Ohno introduced the TPS, or the Toyota Production System, and he took a lot of these concepts from Ford, GM, and even from the supermarkets to make them a world-class organization. And he also implemented the Kaizen philosophy, and basically the tool, what they call the tool of 3P, which is production, preparation, and process. So, and to this day, they're a world-class automobile manufacturer. In fact, years ago, we used to have a Ford plant here where I live in the Virginia Beach area in the southeastern Virginia. We had a plant in Norfolk, Virginia, which is the next city over, and they used to make the F-150 here. And we had a tour of the plant, and one of the employees who was giving the tour was saying that they were trying to emulate Toyota's inventory control system to have fewer parts in inventory and have parts that could fit different models, that could apply to different models of cars. So even Ford back then recognized that Toyota was kind of the benchmark. So we talk about wastes, because as said in Lean, we're looking to eliminate waste. So what type of waste are we talking about? So these are the wastes that Ohno from TPS came up with, and basically the 7 wastes that they articulated were overproduction and producing more product than needed. And we think of this maybe in terms of manufacturing, but we can also think of it in terms of the service or service industry, or or even in an office environment. As an example, sure, in manufacturing, overproduction might be producing more product than needed. But let's look at maybe in an office environment, maybe you're producing reports that really nobody's looking at, that are collecting dust, or even if there's no hard copy, they're taking up space on one of the on a computer server. So you said, do you have overproduction? It also applies to non-manufacturing activities also. Inventory, another one. Any supply in excess required to produce product. Why would you consider inventory a waste, or a potential waste? Because on a company's balance sheet, it's recorded as an asset. So here we're saying it's a waste. Anybody have any ideas why it can be considered a waste?
It's taking up real estate and storage money.
Right, exactly. It does that, and inventory is not like, except for maybe wine. Inventory does not get better with age. Okay, it takes up space. It may become obsolete, and then you're forced to do a write down on the inventory. So especially the Toyota Production System, they're looking to eliminate as much inventory as possible, from finished products to even the parts that are needed for assembling. Third one is waiting, idle operator, or machine time. Once again, if we think of that in terms of a service or office environment, waiting might be somebody waiting. You might be waiting for a response from an email that you sent to be able to finish a job, finish a project, or it might mean waiting for a report, waiting for an invoice, waiting for a payment. So that's so not only in manufacturing, but once again, it can also be applied to the service or office environment. Motion, movement of people or machines which does not add value, a lot of excess movement. And later on in the course, you'll be doing a spaghetti diagram, which traces the movement in on a office or a factory floor. And in the area of motion, you may involve maybe moving furniture around so people move around the office more efficiently. Maybe moving printers around, workstations, things like that. And then 5 is transportation, the movement of material that does not directly support value-added operations. Defects or errors, so that's more in the area of Six Sigma, making defective parts or generating errors. Certainly that's a waste, because most of the time if it's a defect or an error, it's totally non-value, and it's waste because you're going to probably have to write it off. And then extra processing, any process that's not value to a product. And once again, it may be producing some sort of report, adding additional data or information that people really don't need, and that may make it more difficult to wade through the report and find out really what they're looking for. So, the takeaway here is these 7 wastes may have been developed as far as manufacturing, in the area of manufacturing, but they also apply to service and office environments as well. So, and really, Lean Six Sigma did start in the manufacturing area, but it's really expanded rapidly, especially in the area of healthcare. Healthcare has been a huge adapter to Lean Six Sigma. So we want to try to eliminate waste in our organization. So basically, if you think about your own world of work, thinking about your own project, if there's waste in it, and I'm sure there is, probably the waste will probably fit into one of those categories. It's pretty all encompassing, and so basically, in a lean manufacturing, you're eliminating waste by reducing costs in the overall production process, in operations, and also in the utilization of labor. So you're looking at the whole process flow holistically, not one or two individual operations. So you're looking at the whole system or the entire process flow holistically. Okay, that's really the only way of being able to really attack attack these non-value added activities. So I'm going to throw this out let's see. So Team Prime Aircraft, what type of waste do you see in your project?
I think ours mostly time.
Okay.
Time, workout, man hours.
Mm-hmm. Just when you say time, what do you mean? Excessive amount of work hours, or how do you mean?
Basically, our project, our aircraft are grounded. They're on the ground waiting on parts to come so we can fix them or repair them so we can get them back mission ready.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And let's see, and team variation.
Biggest waste in our project, well, we do one scrap and the other is rework labor. So probably the bigger of the two is scrap, due to the variation of the process causing out of tolerance conditions.
Okay. And UTC.
I think a lot of
It'd
it's probably
probably be
the
on
over processing.
Okay. And can you give me an example?
Yeah, I think there's some things that some inspection points and stuff that we do data entry wise that the customer might not feel is of added value asset to the product.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is it's basically most of the waste is one of the you can fit into one of those seven that we discussed before. All right. And that's what you're going to be looking at in this particular course. So this is lean versus traditional methods. Theoretically, it can be having the hours of engineering, product development, machinery, tools, and equipment, human effort, especially in the factory, cutting defects, and also making better use of factory space for the same output. Might mean being able to downsize a factory and still keep production at the same output and having less of investment in factory plant and equipment, and also reducing in-process inventories. And the potential is for having a high degree, high percentage of customers schedule attainment, 99.9%. Um, Reducing the amount of inventory, uptime of 92%, level output, order to customer use in hours and not weeks, and maybe even in minutes. Creating a good partnership with your suppliers and having a good, strong production control function. And these are some of the different organizations, of course, Toyota being one of them. So, barriers to lean. There's no one step-by-step cookbook for implementing it. Every organization's different. You're dealing with different organizational cultures, and even in the same organization, different branches, different departments might have different cultures. So there's really no one step-by-step way of doing it. And and like I said, the culture is the big thing. So so in your organizations, for those of you who are involved in or are involved in implementing a lean or Six Sigma or any other process of improvement initiative, what kind of barriers have you run into?
Getting the buy-in from the people who are directly affected by the implementation,
Okay.
having them agree with the what is supposed to be implemented.
So have you been able to? So what methods were you able to use to convince them, or were you able to?
Well, some people were a little bit easier to work with. Other people, it actually took them more of a hands-on approach where once you kind of walk them through the benefit of it, there was a process that was changed back in the day, and it pretty much got, what's the word I'm looking for? It was made easier and more efficiently, so you didn't have to do as many steps or didn't have to do as much work. So the people who had to do inspecting, or a lot of people who had to work that process, a lot of them came to like the new process a lot better. It just took a while because they said, oh, here we have a whole new thing that we have to learn again.
Right.
That was really the biggest barrier.
Yeah. And anybody else? Good. Thank you. Yeah, some people look at it the next flavor of the month, and especially in a military organization, people feel, well, when the CEO leaves, this will all go away, and we'll get a new CEO, and we won't have to bother with this anymore. So that's something I've seen firsthand. The flavor of the month kind of situation. Because typically in a military organization, every 3 to 4 years, there's usually a change of leadership. Anybody else seen barriers to implementing Lean or Six Sigma or ISO 9000 or TQM or any of those others? All right. So this is kind of a lean implementation roadmap model, and basically it divides it into the leadership roles, because obviously the leadership has to be actively engaged. If you don't get leadership, if you don't get it's really a top down thing, and if you don't get engagement from leadership, it's really not going to happen. It's very difficult to swim upstream. So without commitment from leadership, and I'm not talking about, when I talk about commitment from leadership, I'm not talking about a leader sending out an email saying, "Hey, we're going to implement Lean Six Sigma." They really have to take a role in it, and even get trained themselves in Lean Six Sigma. I've seen where at least they get many of them. I know with General Electric, when they were implementing Lean Six Sigma about 15, 20 years ago, they made a lot of their senior executives go and get at least a green belt. So it wasn't just for the people on the factory floor, so to speak, or the front level supervisors. It was actually senior leadership also. So as an example there. But the leaders have to be really engaged and aligned with the transformation, and really and build really to build a case for change. Getting back to Carter's 8-step change process, there has to be a real case for it, and a sense of urgency for change. Setting goals, priorities. One of the areas there is to map a value stream. And how we're going to and how you're going to achieve the future state goals, removing roadblocks, and so on and so forth. So you've got the leadership roles, and then you go start with the foundation. It's like building a house. If the foundation isn't built correctly, the rest of it's going to fall apart. So if the foundation is built correctly, the rest of it should follow. Like with your projects, if your define phase is not if you haven't followed the steps in the define phase, and your charter and your problem statement, things like that are weak, the rest of the project is going to pretty much collapse. So it's the same thing with implementing lean. You have to have a strong foundation. It's got to be focused, a roadmap, action plans, and also a periodic review progress, and which might, at that point, you celebrate and reassess. But at the same time, if things aren't going the way they should, it may mean looping back to maybe back to the focus part of it, and then going back through the roadmap, and then reviewing the action plan. So it's once again, it's not a one cookbook method for doing it, but it certainly involves leadership, and certainly having good planning and using the right tools. So these are some of the tools, and we'll be going through a lot of these as we go along. One of the key tools there is this value stream mapping, which you'll all be doing a value stream mapping during this class. In fact, you should have gotten the textbook Looking to See, which will take you right through it. So when you're making progress towards lean, some of the evidence that you are making progress is all of a sudden you have smaller lot sizes, increased capacity and throughput, better inventory turns, more available floor space, which means higher return on investment of your asset, improved workplace organization, reducing scrap and rework, which is one of the, we just heard tonight from, I guess it was Team Variation, that was one of the areas they're looking at, is reducing scrap. Reducing inventories, we talked about how inventory takes up time, it takes up space, it becomes obsolete. Reducing your lead time, increasing your gross margin, and improving participation and morale. In some cases, with lean, you might actually wind up decreasing your gross margin a little bit, but maybe improving your volume. So sometimes it could actually go in the opposite way, also, like it did with Walmart. But they were able to lower prices, but increase volume and still increase their bottom line net profit. Once again, and we've learned this, you probably, those of you who've been in quality for a long time, it never ends. Toyota is constantly fighting the waste war. They feel they're only about 50% waste free. So where you begin and where can we improve? Any organization that has an effective lean or any kind of a quality program knows that it's continuous. It never ends. So how do you start the transformation? Well, you have to get a baseline, okay? Basically, you start out with an assessment. There's no one way of doing it. Depends on the nature of your organization. Depends on the culture of your organization. But you start with an assessment. So on the left, there's a lean assessment worksheet, and I believe there's a copy of that under course materials. So what they've done is they've gone around making a lean assessment, and they've used a radar chart to really get the baseline. So these are all the different factors that they're looking at, and basically they've recorded the beginning result and then the current result. So when they did it at the beginning, it was looks like they were at a workplace orderly, and these are the different areas that they looked at, and that was the baseline on the beginning result. So you can see the red on the radar chart was their baseline when they started, or the beginning result, and the blue line you can see the progress that they've made. So that's certainly one way of doing it. Obviously, there's going to be, depending on your organization, there would be different factors involved. But this is certainly would be a good place to start. So this is a plan for implementing lean, and they're using Microsoft Project. Some of you may be using Microsoft Project or something similar for your own Lean Six Sigma project. So in this particular case, they have 168. They've identified 168 steps with corresponding milestones. So there's a lot of work involved in and a lot of steps in implementing a lean in an organization, or really any kind of process improvement methodology. So basically what you want to do is start off with some sort of assessment, and like I said, the assessment, the different factors that depends on your organization. So which means you want to, so it should be customized to your organization. You may want to use an expert. You may want to bring in somebody, an outside consultant, unless you have good in-house talent. Once you have the assessment, you can now make a plan, and then compare the assessment over the time to determine progress and to adjust the plan as required. So you now have a baseline, and then depending after a certain period of time, you would go back and do another assessment to see if there's been any improvement. If not, you might have to go back to the drawing board and maybe start again with the assessment. So I've been talking before. It's as I said, Lean Six Sigma has its origin in manufacturing, but it certainly can apply to the office also. And in fact, I would suggest that sometimes office waste is a lot harder to observe than in the manufacturing area. Why do I say that? I mean, in manufacturing, for instance, if you have an excessive amount of inventory, it's pretty easy to spot. You go into a storeroom and there's stuff falling all over the place. That's pretty good. Or you see things that have been, sitting in storage for months, years at a time. It's a pretty good chance that there's inventory waste there. In an office environment, you may not see that. You may see it's not as obvious because you might have people. You probably in an office environment, you have people sitting at a workstation behind a computer, but you're not seeing up front what kind of rework is going on. The emails going back and forth. Even the waste in office supplies may not be quite as obvious. You don't see any physical scrap that you might see in a manufacturing environment. So in many cases, leaning out an office and finding out where the waste is may be more challenging in some cases than in a manufacturing environment where things are it's a little more tangible. And you can, just like you might set some sort of metrics for a lean assessment in manufacturing, you could certainly do it in an office environment also. So process flow applies to an office just as well as it does in manufacturing. So here in this particular case, you've got the typical functions: review, approve, assign, coordinate, get info, update, certify, rework, draft, copy, deliver. And this might mean emails constantly going back and forth, and trying to excessive amounts of emails going back and forth could be an example of waste, an example of excess motion or transportation or even overproduction. So just like in manufacturing, it's about waste removal, and they define the office waste as people waste, process waste, information waste, and asset waste. Information waste. Many organizations are data rich, but information poor. So you may have the data, but you're not getting the information, or you're providing the wrong information to the wrong people at the wrong time. Asset waste, maybe not making full utilization of the automated tools that you have on hand. And people waste is maybe not. People waste are not using people to their fullest capabilities and to their fullest talents. They say they're relatively office production, waste production are relatively simple to implement, maybe, and can certainly result in cost savings. But many times it can be very challenging to identify, to really get a handle on the waste. In fact, it may involve actually sitting next to some of the employees in the office and actually watch them at work, and really and just sit and observe. So this is what we call spaghetti world. So this is an example of a process flow where they've traced the movement of either people or materials. You can see it's a big bowl of spaghetti. So quality and daily work actually was started by the Florida Power and Light Company. They were also a Malcolm Baldrige Award winner back in the 80s. And they actually earned the Deming Prize, which is a very prestigious award in Japan for quality. So this is their flow chart of their process, of their basically how they look at a process and improve it. So basically, they choose the top priority, they document it, identify areas for improvement, make the plan, implement the plan, and then if it's stable and it's capable, they standardize and replicate it. If not, they look for the special causes, try to eliminate those, and then if it is, if they determine the process is capable, it's a go. If not, they look at the common causes. So that's their model for process improvement. So these are the 5 S's, and we'll get more into that as we go along. Basically, sort, storage, shine, standardize, sustain, and once again, that could be used in both an office and a manufacturing area. I mean, we did a real big one in our office several years ago, and I'll share the results of them during the next class or the class after that. But it's also, the 5S is also a matter of safety, making sure that areas are marked off, especially where there's machinery and things like that, that the areas are carefully marked off for safety reasons, and that's also part of 5S. So not only to keep things in order, but it's also a safety factor also. So lean and quality tools together, and value stream mapping, doing the assessments, process mapping, doing root cause analysis, fishbone. Some of these you've already used. So what are value streams? Well, first of all, you have to identify the value streams in your organization. Your organization should be, every organization, just like every individual, should be producing something of value. So if you're in the Air Force, if you're doing aircraft maintenance, that might be your value stream, is performing maintenance on an aircraft carrier. On aircraft, so they're mission ready and mission capable. In an accounting office, the value streams might be paying invoices on time, creating financial statements. So the first step is you have to identify the value streams, and sometimes they're not always that obvious, and you might need somebody or a good facilitator or somebody with that type of experience to help you identify what your main value streams are. Okay, and then you want to map the value stream. First, the current state, how the process is currently, and then the future state after implementing or leading out the process, and then implementing the change and overcoming the roadblocks. And you will be doing value stream mapping as one of the outcomes for this course. So why do we do value stream mapping? Reduction of muda, which is the Japanese word for waste. So the 7 wastes, once again, overproduction, waiting for the next process step, unnecessarily transporting materials, overprocessing, excess inventory, excess motion by employees, and producing non-conforming parts. So these are the areas that especially in a manufacturing environment, you really need to focus on. In other words, to eliminate muda or waste. So A value stream. It's a set of actions, both value and non-value added, required to bring a specific product or service from raw material through the customer. So every one of your organization has at least one value stream. Okay, now you could now the value stream may not be, or the process may not be efficient, or it may, or it may not be effective, but you do have a value stream in your organization, because your organization has to be producing some sort of value. So it's a matter of identifying the value stream and then improving upon it. So as I said, even though it may be inefficient, it may be ineffective, but it is still a value stream, and your job is to take a look at that value stream and try to minimize and reduce as much of the non-value added activity as possible. And that's one of the main, really the main outcome for this particular course. So what types of value streams are there? Of course, it depends on the organization and the challenges seeing it. So basically, from raw materials to a customer product, that would certainly be in the manufacturing area. Okay, the value. So you're adding value to these raw materials to come up with a customer product. In a customer service area, you've got the service delivery and sales and marketing. In concept to launch is engineering. So in the engineering area, you're adding value to the concept, so you can then launch the product. And then in the administrative area, order to cash. So the customer orders the whatever the item is, and then the value is in the value stream, you're now delivering it to the customer, and you're now getting paid for it, which is the cash. So in each of these cases, you're taking a particular process and adding value to it as you go along, and hopefully value that the customer is willing to pay for, and not non-value added activity. So we want to identify the value stream. So we want to distinguish value creation from waste. So as I said before, you're going to be putting on your waste glasses, looking at a product family, your organization, assembling the team and taking a walk together up the value stream, and it might be physically walking up the value stream and drawing a map of what you find. And it goes back to the old saying, the maps are very valuable. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, that's certainly true with a value stream or any kind of a process map. So why do we do value stream mapping? First of all, the visualization. Most people are visual learners, so you can by having a process map, you can help people visualize the process. It makes a lot more sense to be able to show a process map and being able to explain the process, or a value stream map, and being able to explain it than if you're just trying to explain it to people verbally, because most people need some kind of visual indicators. And in a value stream map, you're linking the material, both the material and information flows, which you generally can't do in a conventional flow chart. Provides a common language. It provides a blueprint for implementation, because you're identifying non-value added activities in the mapping area, and also, especially if you do it with a team, it really provides a lot of good. Let's say you have you pull a process team off the floor and actually help, and actually let them help you with the value stream mapping. A lot of times you'll find that they can come up with some really quick wins as far as eliminating non-value added activities. And then certainly at that point, it's more useful than quantitative tools, and it also ties up the lean concepts and techniques. But you can really make it into a team project, and by not doing it in a vacuum, but doing it with the people that are involved in the process. So in a mapping, in a value stream mapping sequence, it's a form of planning. You're looking at the current performance, and then you're looking at possible improvement actions, which then you're able to map the future state, and then you will continue in the spirit of continuous improvement. You get to the next future state. So once again, it's a continuous process, and as far as these improvement actions, you can use Kaizen events to actually identify and implement improvement actions. And usually these Kaizen events, and we'll get more into that later on in the course, they're really more like short-term Lean Six Sigma projects. And we found in our organization that they were shorter in duration, and we found, generally speaking, they were much more effective than the long Lean Six Sigma projects. But we'll get into that later. So the main benefits are you can see the waste and where it's originating. You can see it right in front of you. It's bringing some of the details to the surface that people may talk about, but you don't really see until you have it on the map. And it links material flow to information flow. It's a vital technique that supports lean manufacturing principles and also applies to office and administrative functions. Because overlooking value stream mapping can cause the entire lean effort to fail. Actually, our next workshop will be looking at it. So very important. So if you get nothing else out of this course, you definitely want to learn about the benefits and develop a value stream mapping for your particular project, because you'll not only for your project, but it's a real valuable tool to have in your toolbox as you continue as quality professionals. So this is a typical current state business process. So as you can see, it's divided between the information flow, how the information is generated, and then then you go into the material flow. So basically, it shows how the customer is communicating with the organization. In this particular place, it looks like we're setting up a help wanted ad or recruiting. So the customer goes to human resources, sends the ad to the newspaper, collects and reviews. So this is the value. So this value stream would be a value stream map maybe for the human resource department, because what's their value stream? What's their value in this particular case? The value is an important value stream for a human resource organization would be recruiting, right? It might also, for human resources, maybe also benefits administration. So the human resource department might have several. Payroll might be another one. So your human resource department may have several value stream flows. Okay, in this particular one, it's recruiting. So as you can see, by the time it gets the requisitions go in, it's taking 3 days. Okay, and then when they actually place the ad in the newspaper, it's just 10 to 15 minutes, and then they're waiting on the resumes from placing the ad in the newspaper. And I realize nowadays most want ads aren't put in the newspapers anymore, but then it's a 2-day wait, and then they go through the resumes. So that's 10 minutes to 3 hours. And then the wait time to send the resume to the contact is 4 hours wait, and then it's 5 to 10 minutes. And then in between to identify the candidates, 2 days, and the actually identification process is 30 minutes to 16 hours. So the lead time, and you add up the lead time by adding up 3, 2, 4 hours, 2 days, 5 days, is anywhere from 12 and a half to 15 hours. So you add 3 and 2 is 5. 7, 12, so whatever, that's 12 and a half, about 12 and a half hours. And the actual process time is 1 to 2.5 days. So the difference between your lead time and your process time is basically non-value added activities. So if you were going to improve this process, what would be the thing you were going to look at? What would you look at to lean this out? Anybody? What would you look at in this particular, if you were examining this value stream map and you're looking to lean out the process? What would you be looking at? Somebody?
The wait and delays.
Right, exactly. So if you can minimize those wait times, you've effectively, and reduce the total lead time, you've effectively leaned out the value stream. You've actually leaned out the process. So those are the areas you want to look at. Why is it taking so long to go from sending the ad to the newspaper to collecting reviews and resumes and sending the wait time between this step and the resume step to identifying candidates. So those are the areas you want to drill down on. Those are the areas you can ask your 5 whys, and those are the areas that you're going to try to put on your waste glasses and try to minimize or eliminate. So what you want to do is reduce that lead time, and because your process time is probably pretty efficient, but as a percentage of your lead time, it's very, very small. Okay, so you want to make that process time a higher percentage of the overall lead time. Questions on this? Okay, so this is a current state map of producing a product. It's a completed value stream map, and it's also in your textbook. So once again, the production lead time is 23.5 days. Okay, the value added time is 184 seconds. So once again, we're looking at the delays between each of the different steps between stamping, welding, and so on. So those are the areas that you want to look at to try to eliminate. And this is an overview of a process. You know about the SciPac, so there's nothing. You've seen this before, but in this case, they're showing the feedback loop. So most of you have already done this using flow diagrams. That can help in the value stream map. So you may even be able to use the flow diagrams that you developed as a basis for your value stream mapping. So where do you start with? And in this, you start with the customer. So, and this is basically you'll be following along this in your Learning to See textbook, and this is probably the best. I wish they had this textbook out when I was going through Lean Six Sigma. It does a really good job of explaining step by step how to put a value stream map together. So basically, they're operating in 2 shifts, and it gives the current situation, and so the State Street Assembly, so they're doing 18,400 pieces per month, 12,000 left, 6,400 right, and then they're doing it in 2 shifts. So this is some of the data that you would have to collect to be able to effectively do a value stream map. So it starts with the customer and their data first. You can see the information flow on top and the material flow on the bottom. Okay. So you can see so they're electronically transmitting the information from the assembly to production control, and then from production control electronically transferred to the steel company, and then it's shipped into the actual material flow, stamping, and so on and so forth. So this is a current state value stream map. And then they've identified 6 steps, and they did this by walking the floor and actually observing the entire process. So those are the 6 steps: stamping, welding 1, welding 2, assembling 2, 1 and 2, and then the shipping. And there's actually software that will really create the value stream map and actually create the timeline. Particular software that's good, and I'll put this down, is iGraphics. I've had a lot of experience using it. In fact, I'll put it in the I think they may you may even, it's not cheap, but I think they might have a demo edition. Anybody ever use iGraphics? Anybody familiar with it? Anyway, excellent software, and it also has a lot of the other Lean Six Sigma tools in it. So it's an integrated product. You can even run simulations in it. In fact, if anybody check it out, if anybody's interested, you may be able to get I can check it out for you. You might be able to get a discount through the school if you want to use the software. So these are some of the terms that you'll be that are used in process mapping: the cycle time, changeover time, lead time, uptime, production batch sizes. So this is some of the data, depending on the nature of the activity that you might have to get to be able to obtain in order to be able to construct the value stream map. So if you can see there, the operation box, that's the assembling. The cycle time is 1 hour. The lead time is 3 days, and the batch, and then the batch size, and then the minimum batch size. So basically, the cycle time is the amount of time it takes to assemble the process. So that's 1 hour for assembly. The lead time is the time for the entire process, from the time they receive the order to the time from the customer to the time they ship it to the customer. So as you can see that this actual cycle time is a very small percentage of the overall lead time. So your job might be to try to reduce that lead time, possibly. And we also add the data to the boxes as we walk the floor. So you might be doing some estimates first and recording the data as you walk along the factory or the office floor. And so there is raw material inventory. So these triangles with the eye in it, those are the inventory. That's the raw material inventory, finished good inventory, and inventory between each process. So that's identified by the triangles with the eye in it. And then you add the information flow on the supplier to it. So really, you can do this, and you might be better off doing the material part first, and then adding the information flow later. And then determining the timeline, data, and performance. Once again, if you're using a software like iGraphics and you fill in this information, it'll automatically generate this timeline that you see here on the bottom. So once again, the lead time is 23.5 days, and the value added time is 184 seconds. So looked at finding opportunities. So basically, in the future state, we're looking at reducing reducing weight, reducing waste, and increasing the rate of the flow. So one of the ways we do this is the 5 whys tool to keep drilling down the process to identify, basically do root cause analysis and continue adding why to identifying the causes. You just have to make sure that you're directing the 5 whys to the right people. So in developing the future state, you want to identify all the steps currently required to move products from order to delivery. So you want to ask, challenge every step. Why are you doing this? Why is it necessary? What happens if we would eliminate this? The questions don't get asked. If you don't ask the right questions, you may not get to the right potential solution or root cause. And of course, many of these things are being done because they've been doing it since the year 1. You probably hear over and over again, why are we doing it this way? Oh, because we've always done it this way. Okay. And this is the future state value stream map for Acme. So what have you noticed on here? That the production lead time, they've eliminated a lot of the wait time, okay? Tremendous amount of the wait time. So it's gone from 23.5 days of, the lead time has gone from 23.5 days to 5 days. And the value added time is still, within 166 sections. So they've probably reduced the lead time by about 90% or so. So that's certainly a success story. And they've identified with these bursts some of the areas that they've looked at: changeover time, weld changeover, weld uptime, and things like that they were able to minimize. So this is an example of 5 whys. Why is an increase in client complaints directly related to number of travel center reps available? It causes no staff available after hours. Why? Because we're not staffed to support after hours work. Why? Insufficient budget. Why? Because budget was made for 12 hours budget. Why? We're only supporting U.S. clients. Why? Our contact was only with U.S. clients because previously Asia and Australia were supported by outside travel agents. So the root cause was they were just centered on the U.S. because Asia and Australia were done by outside agencies, and they've now incorporated into their operation, but they never really made any changes. So this is a pretty good example of why, especially in terms of a service industry, travel agency certainly being a service industry. And other tools for improving flow, tack time, and pitch we'll go through later. Pacemaker, we'll learn about that in the theory of production. Visual workplace, error proofing, time and rework, changeover time, total production, maintenance, standard work, 5S, which we just discussed, information flow, and supply chain management. And so while you're observing these processes, you can certainly, with your cell phone, whatever, you can take videos and still pictures to help with your value stream. That just makes it a lot easier, and then you can, if you're doing it, you can always print out the pictures and put them on a wall where you do the value stream mapping. So I think we're at a pretty good stopping point here. I don't want to rush through this, and we'll certainly have time to go through this. We'll finish this up the next time. So, anybody have any questions or comments? Anything you'd like me to go back over?
No, sir.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is let's just review the deliverables for next for your assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the syllabus wherever it is. I got it somewhere here. Okay, and you guys are familiar with the schedule. Okay. Remember, no class on the 22nd, so I'm going to close that down. Okay, so deliverables. Used to call that homework, now they call it deliverables. Okay, so you're going to create as an individual assignment. Create a 1 to 2 page document that details the value added and non-value added items within your master's business project. So you're probably saying to yourself, why is this an individual assignment, even though we're working on a team-based project? Reason being is you might have a different perspective on what's value added and non-value added than maybe some of your teammates. So that's why we're asking you to do it on an individual basis. Then for assignment 1 through point 3, which is a team effort, you're going to watch the Lean Game. Okay, it's on YouTube and it's definitely there. And then you're going to write a 1-page description of what you learned from watching the plug simulation. So this is a team. This is a team assignment. And then you're going to watch the MIT Lego simulation. That's about 22 minutes. Also, 1-page paper, what you learned from watching the simulation. You're also going to discuss lean principles mentioned in the simulation, process improvement made, and observe results. So some of the lean principles that we've discussed today should be incorporated into that paper. Now, 1.3.3. Create a simple hand-drawn value stream map for your process, and do not using your current state process flow. Now, when I mean hand-drawn, this is what I'm talking about. Not that. Let's see here. Yeah, is it? Here we go. This is from another cohort. This is what I'm talking about. So you're going to be, just imagine yourself in a situation where you're on the factory or office floor and you need to draw this out. So this is what it's going to look like. Now you can draw it out and of course scan it or take a photograph of whatever. But this is basically what I'm looking for. This is a value stream map, hand-drawn, as if you were on the factory or office floor mapping this out, so you can see the informational part on top and the material flow on the bottom. And you've got the timeline here, the value-added activity, the process time here on the bottom, and then the wait time. And then, so you're going to have a total amount of, so you're going to compute the non-value added or the lead time, which is 100, in this particular case, it was 108 days, and the value added time, which was 102 minutes, which is kind of high, but anyway. So this is what, this is what I'm going to be looking for, okay? And so the lead time, let me just go back over one thing. Let me go back here for a second. Just want to make sure you've got this down. So basically your production lead time, okay? In this case, this is everything. This is the wait time plus the value added time. That's your total production lead time. and then your value added time is the amount of time that for each of the different the cycle time for each of the different process steps. So in other words, for stamping, the cycle time is 1 second. For the weld, it's 38 seconds. That's the cycle time. The lead time is for the entire process. Okay, that's the production lead time. In other words, from the time they get the order to the time it's shipped. So of course, as we talked about before, most of the lot of the lead time is actually the weight. Okay, so that's basically what we're looking for in this particular assignment. Okay, so you're gonna hand draw looking something similar to that. Do I have any questions on this? I tell you, the reason I show you the sample, I had one class where I didn't show them the sample, and they did it electronically, but that's not what we're looking for. We're kind of simulating as if you were on a factory or an office floor. Okay. I assume there's no questions that you understand, and I think those are the assignments. So anyway, and on this particular map, so you want to get familiar and then note these metrics, the takt time. Not too worried about that now. The cycle time, the lead time are important. Change over time it depends on your project. Okay, scrap rates once again. That depends on your project, but I should at the minimum I would expect to see the cycle time, the lead time, value added time. So then basically the non-value added time, and now the one thing they want to talk about is here it says non-value added but necessary, okay, such as inspections. Okay, so having inspections from the customer point of view might be non-value added. They just want the product and that's it. So we also call that business non-value added, where in other words it's non-value added activity but it's a requirement. In some cases, it may be a legal requirement that there is some sort of a review. So even though it might be a non-value added activity, you can't eliminate it because it may be required legally or company policy. So that's what we call non-value added but necessary. Another example, and when the government pays an invoice, the federal government pays an invoice. Before that payment is released, usually there's an accounting clerk that processes the payment. Before that payment is released, it has to go through an ACO. That's an authorized certifying officer. Okay, and then he or she certifies it for payment. So yes, that's a non-value added activity, but it's legally required. So that's an example of a non-value added but necessary step. And if you're, I guess if you were doing maintenance on aircraft, there's probably some sort of inspection process before it's released to the flight line. So that would also be an example of a non-value added step but necessary. Do I have any questions on this? Okay, so those are the assignments for next week. Okay. Okay, well, you know what the due dates are. I think I put that all in the schedule. You have your discussion questions. So if nobody has any questions, we'll call it evening. Now, what I normally do is I will stay on until everybody signs off. That way, if anybody has any questions for me or wants to talk to me on an individual basis, I'll hang around. But if not, we'll have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and we'll see you next week. Enjoy if you have the opportunity. Veterans Day, and that's it. So you'll have a Good evening.